Hoffner. May we whisper thank you for all that is good in our lives. May we shout thank you for the abundance of blessings. May we feel thank you. Reverend Tess Baumberger wrote a sermon I'll be reading this morning called The Possibility of Paradise. What is the nature of humanity? Are we basically good or basically bad? This is a central question in theology and in our lives, and it boils down to, can we trust each other? Historically, our faith has come down on the side of human nature as good. Both our Unitarian and our Universalist ancestors denied the idea of original sin. Original sin is an idea that the early Christian theologian Augustine came up with over 1,600 years ago to explain why we sometimes behave so badly. Augustine said all of humanity fell within the sin of, that all of humanity fell with the sin of Adam and Eve, and that our basic human nature is sinful. In fact, he believed babies are born with such a taint of original sin that it needs to be washed away with baptism, which has always seemed like an awful idea to me, that babies are sinful. However, our ancestors, both on the Unitarian side, God is one, and the Universalist side, we're all heaven-bound, denied the idea of original sin and emphasized original grace instead. They said our basic human nature is good, but that the world leaves certain marks on us that can hide or obscure that goodness. Can we trust one another? Our religious ancestors would probably say we can basically trust other people, but also pay attention to actions. We extend trust, but if the other person proves themselves unworthy or untrustworthy, then we approach with more caution. They believed in the possibility of goodness in humanity. I've always liked the idea of basic human goodness. So this faith felt right for me nearly 30 years ago when I first discovered it. But since then, my belief in human goodness has been challenged by close reading of history written by the targets of oppression, women, Black and brown people, and by observing how poorly human beings can and do act in our own day. These days, especially with high-profile people acting with disregard for others, if not cruelty or even brutality, I'm finding it hard to believe people are basically good. Last year, I found the images of immigrants being shaven and marched, bent double through a prison, in onto planes, especially distressing. Plus, they were sent to a forced labor prison in a country known for its brutal treatment of prisoners, without any due process, without any concern for their rights or humanity. Such images, such realities make it hard for me at times to believe in the basic goodness of humanity, or at least the potential for goodness. Anyone else feel that way? So today, I want to share with you some perspectives from more contemporary thought leaders who can help us think about this ancient religious question in some new ways. Two of these more contemporary people are religious leaders, such as the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I recently read the Book of Joy, which includes interviews with these two great spiritual leaders about joy. In the course of the discussion, they also touched on the question of human nature. One thing Archbishop Tutu said that really struck me goes back to the distress many of us felt over those images of immigrants being treated brutally. Archbishop Tutu says, "It's so wonderful that we can be distressed. That's part of the greatness of who we are. You are distressed about someone who is not family in any conventional way, and yet you feel distressed equally. It's incredible just how compassionate and generous people can be." Now that's an interesting take on our distress, isn't it? That our distress at the suffering or ill treatment of others shows just how good human beings can be. In fact, this man, who saw some of the worst humanity in the struggle against apartheid, says human beings have a fantastic capacity for goodness. He points out that most people are doing the best they can and trying to help each other out, trying to make the world a better place. He says to consider all those in the helping professions, teachers, nurses, social workers, therapists, doctors, healthcare workers, all those who dedicate their lives to doing good, to helping people. He says human goodness is so common we don't even notice it. We expect it. Desmond Tutu says because the majority of people are good, that proves that we are wired for goodness, for compassion, for generosity. This reminds me of what Fred Rogers said about how to help children cope with disasters. He said to look for the helpers. And that makes me think of Rebecca Solnit's 2009 book, A Paradise Built in Hell, The Extraordinary Communities That Arise in Disaster. Has anyone read it? It's a beautiful book by one of my favorite nonfiction writers. It tells some stories and summarizes scientific research about human response to disaster. And this book talks a lot about human nature, offering something of a compromise between the basically bad versus the basically good binary. Solnit says the study of disasters makes it clear that we have multiple human natures that respond to our environment. But she writes, the prevalent human nature in disaster is resilient, resourceful, generous, empathic, and brave. She writes, in the wake of an earthquake, a bombing, or a major storm, most people are altruistic, urgently engaged in caring for themselves and those around them, strangers and neighbors, as well as friends and loved ones. She talks about some specific examples, including the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco. She tells how Dorothy Day, the great advocate for poor people, was in San Francisco at the time. The community Dorothy Day saw grow from that disaster shaped her whole life. Community was always so important to her. Solnit writes that when all the ways we ordinarily divide ourselves and pattern ourselves are shattered, people step up, not all, but the great preponderance, to become their brother's keepers. And that purposefulness and connectedness bring joy, even amid death, chaos, fear, and loss. This is borne out again and again in sociological studies of human responses to disaster. Think of a natural disaster or a human-made one, and what do you see ordinary people doing? They help one another. This suggests people are basically good. So why do some people faced with disaster act badly? Solnit says often the worst behavior we see following some calamity is from those who believe others will act badly, and so they take defensive measures, acting preemptively against the imagined threat. So people act badly because they expect others to act badly, and they want to beat them to the punch. Here's a clear example of why theology matters. Our beliefs shape our actions. Believing human nature is basically bad leads people to act badly. It is a self-perpetuating belief. So maybe believing people are basically good leads us to act better. Why, if we have the choice, would we choose to think so poorly of one another? Rebecca Solnit points out that there is not much profit to be made from the types of societies that emerge after disasters, which are ones of free association, sharing of resources, and mutual aid. Solnit thinks we expect the worst of one another because we live in an economy and a society built to serve the wealthy and the powerful. It is in their best interest to divide, to pit everyone else against one another. The media they largely control reinforce the messages the powerful want us to believe. People in power and the media they largely control want us to fear one another, to think of public life as dangerous, to live in secure spaces and be isolated from one another. In his book about community, author Peter Block says, autocracies arise from exactly this dynamic, turning people against each other, playing the politics of fear to keep us divided. Autocrats benefit from our believing we cannot trust one another, that human nature is basically bad and selfish. Again, theology matters. But people like Desmond Tutu disagree with this picture. He says, you know human beings are basically good. You know that's where we have to start, that everything else is an aberration. This is similar to what our religious ancestors believed, that we are born good, but the world may leave marks on us. So behaving badly is an aberration of human nature, created and perpetuated by those who profit from separating us, keeping us believing we cannot and should not trust one another. But our basic goodness is always there. Rebecca Solnit writes, the possibility of paradise hovers on the cusp of coming into being, so much so that it takes powerful forces to keep such a paradise at bay. Disaster allows that goodness to manifest because it disrupts our usual order, makes systems fail, and frees us to live in another way. And when we are free to live in another way, we tend to act in ways that show our desire for a different type of world. Solnit writes, disaster reveals mutual aid as a default operating principle and civil society as something waiting in the wings when it is absent from the stage. It makes sense that mutual aid would be our default operating principle, given that we evolved as social animals in small communities. We evolved in societies where we had to rely on one another in order to survive. So I found some hope in these contemporary views. Solnit's book and the witness of Archbishop Desmond Tutu gave me hope that we can indeed trust one another. Everyone I've spoken about today agrees that human beings are basically good. Perhaps a good practice for the doubtful will be to look for and notice human goodness wherever you see it. Does what Desmond Tutu seem true to you? That most people are good? The more we believe that, and the more we move away from individualism and self-interest towards collectivism and interdependence, the better we feel, and the better our world will be. In order to make that move, we have to decide to trust one another. When we do, we can build a different kind of community. Peter Block writes, "Community grows out of citizens deciding to trust each other and cooperate to make this place better." So one way we can learn to trust one another is by deciding to trust each other, by being part of a community. Any community where we can immerse ourselves in service to one another and the wider world. Community is built by good people deciding to trust one another and to do something useful together. Like we do here. Let's do that. We do this in our congregations. We share our resources. We take care of one another, just a little bit more to say, and model what a better world might look like. We believe in human goodness. We believe that paradise is possible, just waiting within and between us to be made manifest. In our churches, we strive to trust in one another. And we want to work together to make ourselves and the world around us even better. Please join us as we let love guide us through this dark night. Would you stand and join